Welcome to MOTS, where we'll be applying the Manzer or Mosley Thurlow scale of quantitative analysis of pop culture narrative through a binary system.
Or MOTS! This podcast contains spoilers, mature content, and language. Viewer discretion advised. Hello, and welcome to another episode of MOTS. I'm Jonathan Ian Manzer, here with Scott Thurlow.
Cheers.
And Stephen Ramosi.
Hello.
And today we are doing The Revenant. But before we go into The Revenant, we would like to give a shout out to two great souls we lost recently, Alan Rickman and David Bowie. Now, I'm a huge fan of Die Hard. Alan Rickman's a fantastic villain in that, and he's been a fantastic villain in so many works. And David Bowie, while a lot of people think of his acting career as in Labyrinth, I think actually Zoolander has a great cameo in that. So, Scott and Steve-O, would you like to give your best memories of the two?
Sure. Well, yes, of course, I agree that Rickman was amazing in Die Hard, and it's probably maybe he's most famous for it, or at least certainly was one of his most recognizable roles. But the one that I liked him in the most, probably as a kid, or when I first saw it, was he played the sheriff of Nottingham in the Kevin Costner Robin Hood, and he was also excellent, very menacing in that, and his various other ones. He's good in everything, and yeah, it's sad that we lost him, and good.
I would say now his most recognizable role was probably Snape.
Yeah, but that was sort of beyond me at that point. Like, I wasn't big into Harry Potter, but sure, I believe you that he did a good job in it.
He certainly did. I think that what I first remember Alan Rickman from was when he did Dogma, the Kevin Smith movie, and he played Metatron, the voice of God. That kind of blew me away. I loved how good he was in that. That was the first time I kind of realized who Alan Rickman was as an actor. And then, went on to see a lot of other movies. I think I probably saw that before I saw Die Hard, and then Die Hard probably shortly thereafter. And then as far as Bowie, I always kind of liked him. He's very recognizable from Labyrinth and other films that he always seemed to do a really good job as an actor. He was in Elephant Man. I haven't actually seen it, but everyone who I speak to that has seen it says great things about it. But he was kind of always that guy who was around, who made different new music for every generation during the time that he was active. One of the biggest songs that got me into him was when he did I'm Afraid of Americans with Trent Reznor back in the day. I just really loved that.
Well, one of my favorite versions of his songs, not something he did himself, but in The Life Aquatic, Sue Jorge did Portuguese covers of David Bowie songs, and those were absolutely fantastic. I have the CD to this day and listen to it. They're fantastic.
Yes, well, Bowie, I would say just Bowie's quite incredible as well, and perhaps when we colonize Mars, they'll be named Ziggy in honor of him.
I hope so. So now let's move into another thing about death, The Revenant. Scott, you wanted to give a kind of funny log line for this movie?
Yeah, the elevator pitch for The Revenant is Gladiator, Lewis and Clark edition.
And Steve-O, you're going to give the actual synopsis of this.
Right, so the movie starts off with kind of this band of people. They're under this captain. Seems to be some kind of military thing, but they're out collecting pelts. And they are almost immediately attacked by the Native Americans in the area and lose like 3/4 of their company. And then as they're being kind of chased away, they get into a boat, get away, and they have about 10 people left as they're still running, trying to get back to civilization.
Or at least to their main fort.
Right. Leonardo DiCaprio's character, Hugh Glass, is attacked by a grizzly bear in the middle of the woods, shredded up within an inch of his life. And they kind of start trying to carry him back, but it turns out that they can't get him up like the hills and the mountains and stuff. So they say that they'll come back for him, but they leave a couple people behind. Tom Hardy's character, John Fitzgerald, being one of them, along with Leonardo DiCaprio's son, Hawk, and this, wet behind the ears kid, Jim Bridger. So they stay behind. John Fitzgerald obviously wants to kill him and move on, get out of there, collect his money, and be gone. He basically tries to kill Leonardo DiCaprio's character. Hawk, Leo's son, comes back to find him in the midst of this attempted murder, knocks him off. They get into a fight, a scuffle, and Hawk ends up getting stabbed. The rest of the movie, Leonardo DiCaprio is, he's basically buried alive, and then he's still alive, so he climbs out of the grave and proceeds to chase down John Fitzgerald across the entire American Midwest, apparently, until he eventually finds him and have their showdown.
We're going to go in depth now. So, Scott, would you like to start with the actual introduction?
Yes. So as Steve said, it's a small band, a company of Americans doing their pelting business out there in the woods, and they get ambushed by a group of Indians that were the... Does anyone remember?
The Ree.
The Ree.
Okay. So a big battle happens, people are getting cut down, shot with arrows and so forth. It's pretty realistic, gritty, and gruesome, but it was well done.
Right.
So, and Steve mentioned they escaped on a boat. Whoever is left, the captain and Fitzgerald and Leo's Glass, right? His
Hugh
name?
Glass, yep.
There's a nice little character moment where they think they're somewhat safe. They get off the boat and they're like hiding. They're stashing the pelts to come back from later because they can't carry them all. They're still trying to get back to their fort. And Fitzgerald is sort of like prodding Glass about his son is a half-breed, as he describes it, because Glass's wife was an Indian. That's a pretty early character establishing relationship between them. So Glass is the best hunter, like the best navigator that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So he's leading them. The captain even says we're following his lead. He knows how to get through this area. He knows what he's doing. So he encounters, yes, a grizzly bear, and has... I'm going to go on a quick tangent about the grizzly bear. The bear itself seemed both fake and not fake. Like, do you guys agree? Some of its movements were unnatural when he was fighting it, and some of it was natural.
It was obviously CGI.
Yeah.
I mean,
But-
you can't really attack Leonardo DiCaprio with a bear.
Yeah, I understand, but
Hey, he's a method actor.
yeah. So, anyways, but I just thought a bit of it was odd.
To that point, though, I think the buffalo scene later was even more noticeable.
I think it was less fake, actually, but we'll get to that maybe later.
But I felt that the scripted events of the grizzly attack felt very real, even though it might not have always looked.
No.
I actually would believe this is how a attack by a grizzly
bear
bear
would
would
work.
go
Yeah,
down.
they see the thing. Like, yeah, I agree with that. But also, just at some points, I was like, that his like movement looked a little odd, and like a little, jumpy. But anyway, so he has.
Well, one quick thing. Her movements, she was clearly the mama bear.
Sure, you're right. It was a female bear protecting her cubs.
There were a couple cubs around.
Fair enough.
Which is a nice thematic moment as well.
Yeah, so we'll get to that. But so he has a scuffle with the bear. He gets torn up pretty badly and is laid on a stretcher. And as Steve-O said, they attempt to get him up a very steep mountain. There's no way to do it. So the captain asks a couple of people to volunteer / get paid for, or extra pay for staying with him until they can come back and get him. And I think the intro kind of ends right about there, maybe when everyone leaves and he's left with Fitzgerald and Jim.
I'd say it might go a little bit farther than that.
Yeah.
To the point when they bury him alive.
Yeah, okay.
I might say
what?
that.
I think I'll give you that. That's
Yeah,
true. Like,
I might
all right,
say
so
that as
yeah,
well.
right after. Well, to be clear, Fitzgerald views killing him as a mercy killing, essentially, because it seems like he probably won't recover. His injuries are rather extensive. He can't move. He can barely talk. So there's a scene where he's like, "Just blink if you want me to end it all." And Leo doesn't blink, and then finally he does. But it's not clear like if he's assenting to it or just like has to blink at that point.
Yeah.
He gets in a scuffle with Hawk, ends up stabbing him, covers up that fact from Jim, and then convinces Jim that there's an approaching band of Indians about to get to them, so they have to quickly bury Leo and get out of there, which they do, and of course Leo's not dead. So I think I'll agree that's pretty much what the intro is. And yeah, it was all very well done. The shots were established, the world was established very well.
Yeah.
Their characters were set up. You knew exactly what they were like and what their relationship to each other was, and I think it was all very well done.
The movie actually starts out with one of the dream sequences.
Yeah,
Just kind
true,
of
I guess. A flashback.
throughout this. Yeah, it's half flashback, half dream sequence, because they never really establish what happened. Just some vague impressions of tragedies that had befallen Hugh Glass.
Yeah,
beforehand.
it's slowly revealed, but you're right.
Yeah.
But he had, I guess, gone native, if you will. It kind of dances with wolves type thing of joining the Tony tribe, ends up having a son. I actually thought that, is Leonardo DiCaprio trying to play a Native American in this? Because it kind of had the impression that he was actually Native American, and then they established later on that it wasn't. But it felt very real. They captured the period incredibly well. The opening scene where you're introduced to Leonardo DiCaprio's character is he's hunting elk in this kind of boggy marsh.
That's a guy, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just, the locations in this movie are fantastic, and it establishes right from the beginning all of the vistas and all of the interesting locales you'll see throughout.
Yeah, I completely agree. It that marsh right in the beginning actually was really cool. Like kind of walking through this water, this really shallow water that was maybe 3 inches deep, and you're just going around like the trees. Like they were walking through a forest, but it was covered in water. It was kind of surreal, which I think that the director, whose name I'm sure I'm going to pronounce wrong, but Inarritu is really good at. The same guy that did Birdman. He's like really good at these surreal feelings, but also grounding them.
I mentioned earlier the thematic aspect with the grizzly bear. A lot of this movie is about losing family.
Yes,
and
that is a clear theme, which I'm sure was...
Not only is nature danger in this world, but just all the tribalism that exists.
Yeah.
Europeans and the Native Americans, the English versus the French, you have the Native American tribes versus each other. All of these groups have so much tragedy that they're taking it out upon each other. For instance, the Ree, it's established right off the bat that the chief's daughter was stolen, and you have the grizzly bear protecting its cubs. And in fact, you see the cubs watching as the mother grizzly bear dies.
Mm-hmm.
You have Hugh Grant, very protective of
Hugh Grant, huh?
Hugh Glass.
I don't remember him in this movie. Maybe he should have been in it, though.
Hugh Glass, very protective of his son. So you have all of these elements right off the bat. I do want to say something about the grizzly bear fight, is that there's some brutal fight scenes in this movie. Leonardo DiCaprio takes down a grizzly bear that is mauling him with one gunshot and a knife.
A number of stabs, too, afterwards.
He is being mauled by this bear and just knifing it in the throat. It is absolutely brutal scene, and it was a fascinatingly choreographed fight scene as well.
Yeah,
Sure.
I would agree.
Yeah,
Like
well,
you said,
for all
one.
that and everything else we just said, I'm giving the intro a 1.
I'm going to give it a 1 as well.
I'm giving it a 1 as well.
All right.
Now, Steve, onto the body for you.
On to the body. Well, the body is kind of the part that I glossed over a bit because it's mostly Leonardo DiCaprio's or Hugh Glass running into terrible trouble and then finding a way out of it, and then being more injured or, slightly getting better and then becoming more injured as he goes. He narrowly gets away from the Ree at a couple points. He meets up with a Pawnee dude who helps him, gives him food, realizes that he's hurt. At one point he says your body is rotting or something like that, and kind of helps him to heal up a little bit, and then he is, I guess, caught and hanged by the French. There's a scene where Leo goes and gets a horse from the Frenchmen who are camped close by and kills a couple of them, or he kills one of them, and then the woman that he saves kills another one.
Well, she cuts off his balls.
Right.
It turns out that there's actually kind of complex relations throughout this.
Yeah.
The
I don't think
Ree
it's
are
too complex, but there's another layer to it.
But all the interactions between all these different groups. The Ree are stealing pelts from the Americans to sell to the French, and the French are giving them guns and horses. The Ree are looking for the lost daughter, but the Frenchmen have the entire time. So if you're actually going to map out all the interactions, it could get kind of complex, but it's paced so that nothing seems forced or...
Yeah, and it's never overwhelming in any way. I guess the body would close out when Hugh Glass actually makes it back to the camp, to the American camp.
I'm going to
right?
say, I'll nitpick you or split hairs just a little bit. I think, for me, the conclusion starts when one of the French survivors from the camp comes back, and they see that he has the canteen. He brings back the canteen that belonged
they go looking
to Glass,
for him.
and then they know that he's alive.
Yeah, I would actually agree with that.
That's when Fitzgerald realizes and leaves as well.
Right.
So I think that, for me, that's a clear point. But I can see, it's not that big of a deal if you call it when they actually find him and stuff.
Yeah.
I want to bring up the point you said earlier where Leonardo DiCaprio escapes the Ree by jumping to the river. It kind of had a fugitive vibe. I didn't steal your daughter. I don't care.
I don't care, yes.
And then jumps in the river. Also, when he meets the Pawnee tribesman, Pawnee creates a kind of spa from heated stones and putting snow. I kind of want to do that. It looked like a lot of fun, like a little lean-to with the steam rock.
Get a little sauna
You go
going.
do that out in the wilderness and tell me how it is.
Oh, I'll have to get mauled by a bear.
It'll cure all your ills, man.
Sure, I guess. Well, I mean, so the body is mostly Hugh, trying to just literally sometimes crawling through the mud because he can't move and just trying to get back best he can, survive the elements and whatever else he runs across. So, yeah, I mean, of course I liked it, and it contained a lot of the vistas that Ian was talking about earlier. And yeah, they were amazing shots. It's just that sometimes they started to become predictable in a sense to me. Not necessarily in a hugely negative way. Also, not much was happening. It's just him surviving against the elements. Builds this and that, and he has the most bare bones fire going. And he fixes himself up the best he can. He uses the gunpowder, I think, to close up one of his neck wounds or something like that.
Oh yeah, that part was awesome.
It's partly Castaway the Martian.
I was waiting for you to say
but with
that.
an action element to it.
Right.
So sure, while I'm not saying it wasn't interesting. It's just that okay, he's gonna get through the survive the next day.
Yeah.
But I always felt that his survival in this was earned. And during The Martian,
I don't disagree.
I said that there's an issue I had because I didn't feel he never felt like he was in danger. Not that I believe Leonardo DiCaprio's character would have ever died, but it.
Sure, no, the tension was much better. I agree with that. Except there's one little nitpick thing I will have to say. I don't know if you guys will agree with it or not. As it got closer to where the conclusion cuts off, it seemed to me like his injuries were inconsistent. If you notice, like sometimes he has to use a walking stick, and then other times he didn't, and then it was back again. The next scene.
Yes.
Like,
Well, I agree
it seemed to me the extent of his injuries were in service to the plot.
It
but
seemed like
anyways,
he healed rather quickly from being mauled by a
what was
bear.
this, like a week
walking
or
like
less?
3 days later or whatever it was supposed to
But anyway, I just noticed that.
To be fair, though, the theme that they mention over and over again is the tree in the storm. Looks
Sure,
like it's gonna blow
and
down.
fight till you have your last
Because,
breath. Like,
but the greatest roots for a tree are just vengeance. This is Death Wish. This is him going out.
But I'm just
I
saying,
don't care how many tragedies. I'm going to rage until I finish my mission.
Sure, he was a Terminator in that sense, kind of.
Yeah,
But I'm just saying, like sometimes his injuries seemed a bit inconsistent. Not that it detracted all too much.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of just want to mention this because I'm not sure where else I'm gonna, maybe in style or something, maybe. But I just love like how visceral everything, every inch that he gained felt like he was clawing with everything that he had. I guess that's a testament to how DiCaprio played the character, and I thought he did a really good job.
Sure, parts of it could be, but I believe, like, I'm pretty sure I heard reports of people like leaving the movie not because it was bad, because it was too visceral. It was too gruesome at points. I didn't feel that way myself, but I've heard reports of that. It was certainly realistic. I'll say that.
So,
yeah,
there is something that bothered me. Now, this movie is The Revenant. It's about a person who's coming back from the dead. So you have initially Leonardo DiCaprio coming out of his grave, although it's kind of he's half buried. It's not
This very shallow
isn't
grave.
Kill Bill where she digs herself out of 6 feet in a coffin. So they had that metaphor initially. Fine, I can deal with that. Then when he gets healed by the pony, he is in a lean-to that's covered with snow. It feels very coffin-like. I think that was the intent. He breaks out of that, reborn a little bit. Okay. Then he gets a horse and he gets chased off of a cliff.
A very small cliff, at least. A drop-off.
Which was a fantastic shot. But he ends up... the horse ends up falling right down to the ground. He ends up rolling the branches, breaking his fall. And he climbs inside of the horse.
He cuts the horse.
He does a tauntaun.
Yeah, he pulls a tauntaun. Yeah. Sure.
And then the next scene is him coming out like a newborn babe. The metaphor was almost beaten to death. Almost as much as Leonardo DiCaprio was.
Well, yeah, I mean, like that, I agree with that in a sense. Like, yeah, I get it, film, and all. That's what it sort of was the same way for me with all the huge sweeping visas. Like, yeah, I get it. I understand.
They have the dream sequence where he's at a broken down church with all these Jesus images. Not that I was thinking that they were intending to say that he's a Christ-like figure, but giving that resurrection theme again.
Right.
So it was almost a little too much for me.
I think that if you got nothing else from this movie, that it was about resurrection. It was what you're supposed to know.
Sure.
But, I mean, it didn't...
Like, you can't miss it, and they made sure you couldn't.
Yeah.
But could they have pulled back a bit? I think I agree that they could have.
They could have, and I don't think it would have taken away from the movie, but it didn't bother me either at the same time.
No, again, it came close.
Yeah, it was perfectly fine. Like we discussed right after coming out of the theater that we felt maybe 20 minutes or so could have been cut out. It didn't drag per se, but I felt how long this movie is. It's 2.5 hours. So I began to feel that towards the end. So I was just ready for them to get to the end. And they did get to it fast enough. But some points I was like...
I would say that 20 minutes to a half hour before the conclusion starts, I was really feeling the weight. And then the conclusion carried the weight.
Yeah, that was all perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So that was the weakest part of the body for me. But otherwise, I agreed. It held up pretty well. And even if all those things you just said were true, it still didn't detract it from it that much.
I actually was really invested through most of it. They did a great job of making the this kind of predator always on the horizon that you never knew when they were going to sweep in and cause issues. You had just nature. Think of it this way: it's like Castaway, but with problems of tribalism.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's if Tom Hanks had to deal with cannibals on that island.
Right.
I'm going to give it a 1.
I will give it a 1 overall as well.
I'm also going to give it a 1. Yeah. Like you said, maybe I wouldn't say it dragged. It was a little slower in parts than it was in others, but it didn't really bother me because I always had something gorgeous to look at on screen, regardless.
Well, we're on to the conclusion now, and they're all back at this fort. And because they didn't bring the furs with them, there's an issue with payment. So Fitzgerald decides to rob the safe. A Frenchman arrives with the canteen that Hugh Glass had, so that Fitzgerald knows that he's still alive. So he decides to take the money and run.
Mm-hmm.
Just then, Hugh Glass comes back, and the captain...
Well, no, they go out to search for him. They find him shortly outside their camp, or outside the fort.
Yeah.
But they decide, Hugh Glass and the captain decide to go after Fitzgerald, and they end up throwing young Jim in the brig in order... because he also betrayed it. Granted, it wasn't necessarily his fault, but
well,
he
Fitzgerald
was
lied to him, and he
Right.
could only take him at his word.
Glass tries to clear his name before they go out and
Yeah,
search for...
he does. He does.
They end up finding Fitzgerald, but Fitzgerald has the upper hand, kills the captain, and then they get into this prolonged chase scene through the wilderness where Leo's character ends up shooting Fitzgerald. Leo's already wounded, so they're kind of both fighting their
They're having
way
a daredevil
through.
kind of fight.
Yes.
Sort
Yeah.
of.
They get in this brutal combat with each other, just chopping fingers off, stabbing each other. It is an intense fight scene.
Yeah, it's quite violent. Yeah.
And Fitzgerald's talking smack the entire time, saying, "Oh, this is not going to bring your son back. You should have raised your son to be a man instead of a wimpy little boy." Just as Hugh was about to take him out, the revive. Hugh lets them have Fitzgerald, and he ends up kind of wandering off into the distance, and I assume dies at the end because he sees a vision of his dead wife. And,
Yeah, well, that's why
I
I said the Gladiator thing. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty heavily implied, at least to me, clearly.
Yeah, I would say that's kind of... Yeah, he was taking a page out of whoever directed Gladiator, wrote it at least.
But I think that it cut off at the perfect point because I would not have wanted to see anything after that.
No,
It would have been superfluous.
there was nothing more to see.
after
There was
that
nothing
matters.
needed to happen.
Yeah. Except for maybe, I want to know if Jim was all right back at the...
He was. He was fine.
Well, there's nobody to clear his name anymore. Although you
He
mentioned...
did clear it before that. He said Jim had to believe Fitzgerald.
Glass
He had
said
nothing
that
to do with it.
to the captain,
Yeah.
and then they both went out, and neither one of them came back.
That's true, I guess. Yeah.
But, as Ian
That's a
mentioned,
good point.
it was in front of the doctor, so maybe the doctor could clear his name.
Yeah. Anyway.
So yeah, I think it was a great ending. It was very satisfying, and again, it was a very bloody, brutal fight scene that never felt over the top. It didn't feel like both.
It wasn't a they live fight, but it was just an intense fight between two haggard men who are dead set on murdering each other.
Yeah, I love right before they actually get into the fight where they're walking away. I think Fitzgerald has been shot.
Yeah.
And
Gets shot through the shoulder.
Glass is just slowly walking after Fitzgerald, who is slowly trying to get away. He's just like walking away. They're both just exhausted.
That's exactly why I thought of Daredevil style kind of fight. But it was all. I agree. No, it was a well choreographed fight. I'll say that, and I really like the. It was both slow and fast in some sense. Like when Hugh swings the hatchet and it like chops off 3 of Fitzgerald's fingers. It happens like that, but it's really
like
cool.
Split second, yeah. I completely
So anyway,
agree.
I agree with all that. I think it was perfectly done.
I like how he was almost climbing up his body with the knife at the end. So again, I thought the ending was very satisfying, and I felt paid off for the entire film. It kind of gave the message that revenge, it's not all about revenge in the end, although he leaves up to God, which I'll let God be your judge, and then
and he immediately gets scalped.
Yeah.
So.
Again, that is the
Again,
same.
for the second time.
And
for,
final.
For keeps this time.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't have anything else to say about it.
No, yeah, I mean,
think it was
I think we're all giving it a 1. Sounds like. So.
yeah, definitely giving it a 1.
okay. Well, Scott, we're back to you with the themes.
All right, so we went over a couple of them just earlier. Like, yeah, they were pretty clear. Like revenge, rebirth, I guess, remix, whatever you want to call. You know, but I mean, it's a simple story, possibly the simplest framing of all, but not simply told. I guess I want to say, you know, the motivations for each character are very clear, and why they had those motivations, they made sense. Yeah, like you said, again, the relationships between various groups and tribes and politics and so forth.
Yeah, that's
but
what
at the
I
end
was-
of the day, it's basically a family revenge. They're like, I want to kill the man who killed my son. I believe he says that line out, right?
Right.
And that's what his whole motivation for is after being left for dead by that same man.
What I kind of like about this is that none of the groups are good. There's individuals.
Everyone's
who are good
just
at
gray
that.
morale.
Yeah.
And because how Native Americans are portrayed in film varies based on what era of Western you do.
Sure.
So you have them as the straight up villains, you have them as the noble, savage, cliche. In this one, they do have that at times where they're, that you stole our
Yeah.
land.
There's one
line.
heavy-handed-ish line that they drop in.
But for the most
But
part,
otherwise-
you see them butcher individuals who aren't. They're taking them out because they're European settlers. Not that there's any particular. There's a warfare.
Yeah.
I liked that no one was over the top good or particularly villainous.
Yeah.
It was just all real, down to earth issues.
There wasn't really any sentimentality with how they were portrayed.
Yeah, I like that. It's well said. and I agree.
You know, it was kind of, they tried to find the motivations that they would have had given the situation, and they portrayed them based on that. I think it all really comes down to the idea of rebirth or cheating death, trying to defy death in order to finish your life's work, which at this point,
Sure,
after his son
yeah.
gets killed, is to kill the person who killed his son.
Like you said, they had that motif of the tree trunks surviving the storm and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was about a vengeful spirit in a way. You could actually argue that Fitzgerald was being pursued by a Michael Myers
An unnatural
type.
thing, yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
but we're rooting
Like
for
I said,
him in this.
Yeah, he's a Terminator,
Right.
but we're on his side, more or less.
So even though he's indestructible, they made him very human. They
Right.
made him very. His survival felt earned. Thematically, I think it was decent. I think they did a good job of period piece, and it was
Yeah.
maybe not even the deepest thing, but they handled their business well.
Yeah, I agree with all that. That's well said. I think I couldn't say it better myself.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I don't think that you need to get into like metaphysics and stuff to have a good theme, and I think that they did what they
Well,
were doing.
sometimes,
I
but
think
not in
that-
this film.
I think that in this film they did what they were trying to do really well.
I also want to make one last point about Fitzgerald and the fact that he constantly refers to God, but doesn't very much feel like he's only paying lip service to the
Yes.
thing that
Yeah.
justifying his actions by saying that God will forgive. All that. So you have that aspect to his character, but again, I don't think they're trying to make.
It wasn't the biggest aspect. It was
Yeah.
sort of there. It was more with the way, like, how I took it as it's his justification for doing what he does.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
about it.
So again, I'm giving it one. Everyone else.
Yes.
Yep, I'm going to give it a 1 as well.
I wasn't sure what
for
I was going to
themes.
give themes, but I think we ended up, you guys convinced me and I convinced myself.
Okay. We move on to Steve-O with the antagonist.
All right, so the antagonist, if you don't think it's the bear,
Bears. Damn it. That's what I was going to say.
is pretty clearly, I think, in this Fitzgerald, who was kind of he's an antagonist that you can understand his motivations, even if you don't agree with them.
He's not a card-carrying villain, necessarily.
And to be honest, I thought that while Leonardo DiCaprio did a terrific job in this film, I thought that Tom Hardy did an even better job than him in his role.
Especially his facial expressions. One of the things that this film does quite often is heavy close-ups
Yeah,
on characters. And every time Fitzgerald was justifying his actions or worried, it really came clear from the
Yeah.
actor's face. And I have to give him total credit. I could argue that there are kind of grander antagonists, but
Nature.
that's like
Yeah.
nature, but also
Sure,
in a sense
Politics, or like, you know, like
Trade.
tribalism. Yeah, yeah.
Capitalism.
Capitalism.
But Fitzgerald's the clear one, and he's an opportunist, but he's not just a mindless thug.
No, he knows what
Right.
he's doing.
And he survived.
He's
you know,
underhanded.
he's a
craftily-
survivor.
Yeah, I can say he's craftily underhanded. I think they both did a perfectly good job. They had great chemistry. I think it's 50-50. I don't think either one was better than the other, but they both had a top-notch performance and played off each other quite well.
Yeah, I will say that they both did an amazing job in this film. I thought they were both awesome. If you asked me, I would have to give it to Tom Hardy. Well, first of all, Tom Hardy was talking for most of the film.
That's a good point.
Whereas
We'll get to that
Leo
in
was like
dialogue, right?
grunting for half of it. But
I was waiting to get to that point. But sure, maybe it's true.
But, yeah, I agree, and I think that he deserves an award for his portrayal.
And I think he got an Academy Award.
Well, he got not.
Or a Golden Globe, that is.
That's very deserved. This is, I think, the best performance I've seen him do, and I don't know, he was a fantastic villain in this.
You liked him better in this than Mad Max?
I was going to say he's better in Mad Max, but he wasn't playing the villain in Mad Max. It's kind of different, but either way, he was great in both, we'll say. And
Yeah,
you
I
have to
would
like him
agree
better
with
in this one. Sure.
Yeah, but the different characters, too.
Sure, that's
he
exactly.
had more layers in this film than he did in Mad Max.
Yes.
In fact, you could say that Leonardo DiCaprio's character is the equivalent to Mad Max.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely giving him a 1. For
I'm
Mad
giving him a
Max.
very strong one. I
For sure.
loved his
Same here.
performance, and he turned a character that could have been wooden and like kind of boring.
It could have been
into a
stilted, but
into
he
a nuanced
fleshed
character.
it out
Yeah,
very well. Agreed.
So I'm doing protagonist, which is Hugh Glass, Leonardo DiCaprio. Now, it's really hard to kind of judge this kind of performance. Again, I have to compare it to Castaway and The Martian because they're
Broadly,
similar
yes.
roles. A person in isolation trying to survive against the elements.
mm-hmm.
Where in The Martian you had him giving these video logs, so he had a constant narrative. They completely get rid of that in this and just have him surviving. He didn't even have a volleyball Wilson to talk to during this. It was just the entire acting performance was done with grunts and facial expressions.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And,
For the most part, at least.
and pain. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I think he did a fairly good job, and when he had opportunities to play off other characters, like especially towards the end when he's with the captain, you see the brokenness that you've witnessed manifest itself. I don't care if I'm dying anymore. I just need my vengeance.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it was a very. Again, I think Tom Hardy did a better job, but I can't at all fault Leonardo DiCaprio for his performance.
You know, like I of course I'm not going to say he did a bad job or anything, but it's funny that his interactions were with himself essentially for the most part. He wasn't talking to anybody really for a lot of it, but it was just him surviving. But I do agree, like yeah, it was evident on his face, and every tick that he had, you could like sort of see what he was going through.
Yeah,
It was very clear, and it was very well done. I'll agree to that.
he did a lot with a part that had very very few lines of dialogue.
Yeah.
So, and the character was, this is based on a true story, and trying to live the life that this character did, or that this real person did as his character. I think that DiCaprio did a really good job playing Hugh Glass and making it clear how much pain and like suffering he was in, not only because of his injuries, but because of the loss of his son, and just
his entire tribe, all his
Right.
his wife.
Now, I think about it. He's also Rambo in some sense.
yeah.
Oh, that's actually a good point. One of the things is this character should be one-dimensional, but DiCaprio does like there's very human moments throughout this.
It's hard to because of the nature of the plot and the action. It's hard to like flesh it out, but he does. I agree.
But when
he does a really
when
good
he's
job.
with the Pawnee tribesmen and they're just catching snowflakes,
Yeah.
You see that he isn't totally lost
Yeah,
to that.
he's not completely dead inside
Sure,
just yet.
And, so again, for a part that shouldn't have been multi-layered, it was, and I understand his motivations as you pointed out. I think it was very.
I like that description as well, what you just said, and I think we're all giving it a 1.
Yeah,
Looks
I'm
like.
giving it a 1 for sure.
If anyone has anything else to add.
So now we're on to supporting guest Scott.
So this is the one I was sort of debating about the most, or at least it was less clear to me. No supporting cast was bad per se. In fact, they were all pretty good. Just that there weren't very much of them, and what there was, like, they weren't on screen all that long. But I guess in the end, the captain was quite well done. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. Jim, I liked him, of course. He was well done. Even Hawk, he served his role, and from what he was there, it was fine.
Yeah.
And there wasn't much. Like I said, it's hard to describe. Or what was there was good. There just wasn't much of it. But they did the best they could, I think, with it. So I think they served out their little camp, their little platoon, kind of making a little platoon out of this movie as well a little bit. I was going to possibly say that as my description, but no, they clearly had a camaraderie, if not that, and the rivalry on the opposite end of the scale between Fitzgerald in Glass
Right.
was very obvious, and everybody sort of like their compatriots fell on one side or the other, or like were tried to remain neutral, did the best they could. So all that, probably the captain, I guess, if we do our tradition of picking out the one you liked the most, I think I liked him the most, and based on him, the strength of his part, and everyone else, I'll probably give it a good score.
Now, Jim, I want to go piece by piece for these characters. I feel that Jim almost didn't have a point in this movie, except to give a person for Fitzgerald to talk to and flesh out his character.
Mm-hmm.
Without Jim there, this would have been a much poorer movie, but I don't think that he actually had a narrative role besides being
I agree with that. You're right about that.
The captain, I really like that they just... There should have been a lot of one-dimensional roles in this, and then they layered. Yeah, it wasn't a huge cast, but the captain could have been just this stoic individual, but he
could have been completely forgettable.
Yeah,
but
he was
in
kind
fact,
of a
he
rich
wasn't.
boy who was out of his element in this wilderness, trying to do the right thing, not really knowing. He's having to trust these kind of shady individuals, and I think gives them too much trust. He has morality where they have survival, and it ends up leading to his death. You had the chief of the Ree, who had a pretty prominent role and gave a human element to this horde that was just descending to wipe out civilization in this area.
If you think about it, you just made me think about it. The chief was also like basically on the same arc as Leo was.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so.
Pretty much, he was looking for his daughter. There was also the Pawnee that he meets, and that I thought that interaction was brief because he gets the Pawnee man gets killed shortly thereafter. I don't even think they got names exchanged, but I thought that was a really good interaction between the two of them, and it gave Hugh Glass something to, or Leonardo DiCaprio really like as playing his
Something
character,
to play off of,
something
yes.
something to say for a little while, or somebody to talk to, which helped. I don't know.
I think Hulk was the weakest part of this, but that
again,
was his character.
He needed to be what he needed to
Yes.
be, and that was it. Sure.
But he was a one-dimensional character.
But that's all was required of him of the plot.
But the thing is that
I think he was a 1.5 dimensional character
well,
because
but-
they gave him just enough.
Yeah, but all the other characters had... For instance, Jim, who should have been almost a 0.5 character, they gave a lot of depth to a very small role. So, again, they do a great job with making these all feel like real people.
I agree with that. So
Yeah.
I think for all that reason and everything else, I'll give them a 1.
I'll give all of them a 1. Also, the bear was good.
Yes,
Alright.
the bear was fantastic.
Sure.
And the wolves attacking the buffalo.
And the wolves.
Okay, Stilo, we are on to dialogue.
All right, so there is like half of this movie is played out with no dialogue.
Let me give you if I allow me to give you a sample of some of that dialogue. That's you heard that a bunch because it's the sound of someone trying to survive and hardly able to speak. So that's what Leo had to work with for a large part of
so
it.
like that was a lot of the dialogue, or I wouldn't even call it dialogue.
Right. Well, that's what I'm trying
But
to.
the dialogue between Jim and Fitzgerald, I thought was really good.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that Tom Hardy as John Fitzgerald did an awesome job. I thought that dialogue was not necessarily quotable because it's not that kind of movie, but it was all. I was into it every time the two of them were talking. Even at the end when the Captain Henry and Glass are talking around the table, that was a really good scene, like a really tense scene. And anytime Hugh Glass actually talked, you were like kind of into it because he didn't talk very much.
He hadn't been talking
in the
for a
film,
while.
yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
I'm going to go artistic for a moment and pretentious.
For a moment.
Hey, there's a number of maybe this is more of a stylistic thing, but I noticed throughout that what they would do is they would set up situations with audio before they showed what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it in a sense nature was having a dialogue with Hugh Glass through a lot of it. You would hear the rumble of the buffalo horde long before you saw it. You hear the gunshot in the distance, and again, you get the sense that the characters are saying you can hear that gunshot for miles around. You're giving your location. you actually get the sense of what that's like in this.
Yeah.
That it is marking you. The silence and then the sounds, the bear's growls, you saw the cubs, you heard the movement of the bear through the woods before you saw it come out. There is that element that I would say that nature has a speaking role in this.
I like that. Yeah, that's pretentious as shit, but I don't necessarily dislike what you just said. I will say the human dialogue then, I think it's just, like you said, Steve-O, it's not necessarily quotable, but it's not necessarily trying to be that, but it is, I think, grittily realistic given the situation. So I think that's where I give it the most credit on. But I do like your point there about nature as well. It's interesting. Another little layer, if you will.
Also, this movie did something that I really enjoy. Characters spoke the languages they should have been speaking. The French were speaking French. The Native Americans were speaking
all the tribal languages, yes.
Pawnee, as they were. You had Hugh Glass, who could speak both the Pawnee and the... I don't believe he could speak Ree, though.
No, I don't think he...
They never have interactions
just
between the two.
Yeah, he could speak Pawnee for sure.
But again, I have a pet peeve when everyone who is speaking English, regardless. So it felt very realistic, and the dialogue was very realistic. People whose stations in life they were, the kind of language they used.
There was even one part where the chief speaks French, and it said, like, the subtitles say in French, like whatever he was actually saying. So that was a cool little thing too.
Yep.
But that's pretty much.
Yeah, it was solid. It just kept the layer of realism up very well, even if it was just grunts or actual interactions.
So, one's all around.
I'm gonna give it a 1.
All right, and I'm onto style here. This movie was directed by the guy who did Birdman, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
And this director is style.
Mm-hmm.
His cinematography is masterful. And yes, I didn't like Birdman particularly well because I thought that it was too charming for its own good.
Whatever that may mean. Sure.
This movie sold me completely on the realism and using cinematography to make you feel like you're as lost in this world as every character is. You're lost in the middle of the wilderness trying to make your way to a little fort. And he does something that I found amazing when I realized they do heavy close-ups on characters with these grand vistas in the background, making you actually feel claustrophobic, even though they're not in confined space.
It's as if nature is closing in around you, even though you're in like a wide open field or a forest or whatever.
Yeah, so they keep up. He does isolation incredibly well. Again, I was floored by it.
I mean, I agree. Like, even though I complained earlier about how there were too many, like, I felt sometimes there were too many shots, or it started becoming predictable where I thought to myself, okay, he's going to cut to a wide open vista. But the shots themselves, like you said, cinematography was amazing. It's just that maybe some of those should have been saved for other movies or something else. But like you said, it sort of gives nature itself a character and also presents to you, the audience watching it, a sense of isolation from the human character's point of view. So, that's pretty much, I agree with all that. That's what I have to say about it.
Excuse me, I don't have all that much to add. I think that the cinematography was incredible. Like, all these like wide open landscape shots were amazing. You had that stark contrast with those really close in head shots on the zooms. And then I guess the other thing I wanted to mention was the soundtrack. Or
I was waiting for you to mention
the sound effects. Like the soundtrack was. I don't really remember a lot of the music.
Atmosphere.
I think it was a bit more subdued. Yeah,
but it definitely didn't get in the way of the movie. I'll tell you that much for sure. And the other thing that I really did notice was the sound effects.
Sound design.
As you were mentioning, and as part of dialogue, that idea that like you always had the sounds of nature going on that really added to the way to the feeling of the movie. But yeah, I love this. I love this guy's style. I'm not going to try and pronounce his name again because I'm pretty sure I butchered it earlier. I love his style. I love Birdman, and this was a really good follow-up.
You know what this actually reminded me of while you guys were talking? The middle of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid when they're fleeing.
Yeah, well, I brought that up earlier.
Did you?
Well, it may have been right after we got out of the movie, but yeah, the similarity was obvious to me there with that.
The same wilderness shots and sense of isolation. So this is the only thing I can really off the top of my head compare it to.
I think I'll give it. Costume design was excellent. Like
Yeah.
again, everything about this movie like convinced you that this was what it was like, and it was very realistic. So that's the only thing I can
So
add
one's
about
all
that.
around for style.
Right.
I believe so.
Okay. And now we're on to recommendation. So Scott, you want to give a recommendation?
Yeah, go see it. It was really well done. Again, the only minor complaint I had is that it started to threaten to feel long, but in the end wasn't. And all parts of this movie built into it made it a very, very well put together work and deserving of a watch.
Yeah, it was definitely a really good movie. Like I just said, a really good follow-up to Birdman for
I wish Birdman was in this movie.
this guy. Well, maybe that'll be Revenant too.
Okay. Return of Birdman. But anyway,
Return of Birdman.
Good.
Absolutely go see it. I actually liked it better than we saw Hateful Eight last week, and I liked it better than that.
Mm-hmm.
So, go see it. Go see The Revenant.
I think this is the best movie I've seen this year. I think this is running in we're doing an Oscar thing coming up for Best Picture. We're going to watch all the films for that. So this is in running for Best Picture for me. And I doubt anything else we have yet to see will beat this. So in my point of view, I love this movie, and I fully 100% recommend this.
Mhm.
Mad Max may rival it for me, but
I enjoyed it. But
I loved Mad Max.
All right. Well,
well, we'll talk
we'll
about
see what
that
happens
during the episode.
the actual one.
Yep.
Sure.
So this is going to be an easy one to go around. We all gave this a 10, giving this movie a 10,
Revenant's a good movie, man.
which I think might be one of our first 10s.
I'm not sure if anything else.
I'm
has
not sure
gotten
if
a
this might be
perfect
the first unanimous 10. That's
Yeah.
possible. Yes,
So that's a high praise coming from
it sure is.
us. So yeah, definitely go see. I'm Jonathan Ian Manser, here with Scott Lilla
I ain't too crazy about your podcast because I got one of my own.
and Stephen Ramosi.
10. Have a good one.
This has been Bon Mots. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Music by Chris Morgan.
Editing and engineering by Jonathan Ian Manzer.
This has been a Los Angeles production. All rights reserved.